Ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to India Grid Trust Q4 FY21 earnings conference call hosted by Edelweiss Securities Limited. As a reminder, all participant lines will be in the listen-only mode and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions after the presentation concludes. Should you need assistance during the conference call, please signal an operator by pressing star then 0 on your touchtone phone. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I now hand the conference over to Mr. Swarnim Maheshwari from Edelweiss Securities Limited. Thank you and over to you, sir.
Thanks, Stephen. On behalf of Edelweiss, a warm welcome to all the participants. I hope all the participants are safe and healthy. From the management today, we have with us Mr. Harsh Shah, CEO, Mr. Jyoti Agarwal, CFO, Ms. Meghna Pandit, CIO, and Mr. Satish Talmale, COO, who will represent India Grid Trust on the call. I'll just hand over the call to Harsh for his opening remarks, post which we'll have a detailed Q&A session. Over to you, Harsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Swarnim. Am I audible? Swarnim? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, now you are. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you. And as Swarnim mentioned, really hope for safety and wellness of everyone who has joined on the call. This is a quarter 4 FY21 investor call as well as conclusion of the financial year 21 call. So we have captured certain items for the full financial year to give a perspective of certain items as well as a little bit of about our evolution over the last 4 years. To start with, on slide 5, I would like to reiterate our vision. Our vision is to become the most admired yield vehicle in Asia. We believe if we do the 4 aspects of our business model and execute them well, we'll be able to achieve our vision. First one being focused business model, which is focused on long-term contracts, low operating risks, and stable cash flows. Second, value accretive growth, which allows us to do DPU increase on a year-on-year basis and create a growth pipeline for future. Predictable distribution. So we have been giving guidance on a forward-looking basis and also providing quarterly distribution, which is predictable for our investors. And the last one, which is a focus on optimal capital structure, which is at a consolidated leverage, maintain our consolidated leverage lower than 70%. And focus is on maintaining our AAA rating via prudent liability management as well as good quality assets. On the slide 6, we captured our evolution over the last 3 years. Starting from a growth track record in terms of assets, when we listed, we had 8 lines, about 2,000 circuit kilometers, 2 substations, about 6,000 MVA, and 4 states, and 10 revenue generating elements, and approximately 3,700 crores in fact. Fast forward today, we have 40 lines, about 7,600 circuit kilometers, 11 substations with 13,500 MVA, and presence across 17 states and 1 UT, with 50 different revenue generating elements and with a total asset size of approximately 20,500 crores. We have been able to achieve this phenomenal growth based on execution of our promises of focusing on value accretive growth in the assets that we operated. The next important part of our evolution has been our unit holder base, how it has evolved and diversified over a period of time. Starting again from IPO, we had the sponsor about 16 odd %. We had no insurance companies. Retail holding was about 445 crores, and FPI is owning about 39.9%. Fast forward today, we have a change of sponsor, or rather addition of sponsor, with KKR being sponsor as well as owning about 24% of the units. 9 insurance companies own about 8.6% stake, all of them coming along the way via secondary sale and subsequent rights issues. Retail holding has increased from 445 crores to 1825 crores. And this is also evident in the liquidity that we see in IndiGrid lots on the exchanges. DII holdings have relatively come down in proportion to the FIIs, and the FPIs hold 31%, and if we add KKR and this together, it will be a higher number. The third aspect of evolution, which is the market development, and we've seen since the time when we listed, in which market was in a state of flux and evolution. We believe now it has come to a status of its evolution that many new issues that we have seen in the recent future. We have, in line with our strategy, consistently raised capital to ensure that we maintain a healthy balance sheet, predictable DP growth. While we listed with 2,250 crores of IPO, subsequently we did a preference issue of 2,500 crore and very recently a 1,284 crores of rights issue. This is a unique aspect about InvITs in comparison to other equity listed companies, considering that InvITs have a mandatory payout ratio of 90% of the cash it's earned. It requires raising of capital for its growth because it is dividending out all the cash flow it accrues. We believe it is a better corporate structure because it enables equity investors to have a stable yield, predictable yield with a mandatory payout ratio, and contribute capital if they feel they want to contribute and is the right decision at that point in time. Our average daily turnover has increased from about 5 crores to about 10 crores in 2021, which is clearly indicating the liquidity improving. Total returns delivered in year-on-year basis have been substantially higher and is increased over a period of time. Our net debt to AUM has remained within the planned numbers to maintain a robust balance sheet. And along the way, there have been several changes like leverage limit to 70%, lot size reduction to 1 lakh, RBI enabling bank lending, induction of KKR as a sponsor, and insurance and FPI lending to InvITs becoming a reality. All of this contributing to InvITs becoming a market of its own. On the next slide, which is slide number 7, it just captures the evolution of our financial performance over the years. And as one can see from different numbers, in general, we have grown anywhere from 50 to 55% in terms of our compounded annual growth rate of all parameters, whether it's revenue, EBITDA, AUM, and NDCF, which effectively also has delivered a good DPU growth for the investors who have chosen to invest since listing. And we believe we'll continue to focus on this DPU journey as we move ahead to ensure that stable distribution and consistent growth remains the focus of IndiGrid. Coming to slide number 9, on just a snapshot of who we are today. So we are today India's first power transmission yield platform with an asset size of about 20,500 crores, a presence, as we spoke about, in 17 states and 1 UT, with 40 lines and 11 substations. We are AAA rated, and our residual contract life is about 30 years. And in terms of another dimension of size, we are 11,550 towers and overall constitute about 430,000 tons of metal between steel and aluminium. Going to FY21 key highlights, The first aspect on the portfolio growth, we have acquired 6,900 crore worth of assets in FY21, which has taken our AUM to 20,500 crores, including the largest asset ever transacted in power transmission sector in India, which we executed, called NERSS2 in Q4 of 21. Besides that asset, this year is special because we acquired 3 types from different kind of counterparties, starting from a joint venture with Power Grid, which is a cost-plus transmission asset which we acquired from Reliance Infrastructure, a state transmission assets which we acquired from a JV of Kalpataru and Techno Electric, and signed the first solar asset with FRV in the last year. In general, last year growth was about 35% of revenue and 26% of EBITDA on a year-on-year basis. It is important to note that NER acquisition happened in the last week of March and therefore has very limited contribution to both revenue and EBITDA numbers of FY21. In tandem with the portfolio growth, as we have consistently increased our DPU in the past, what we are guiding for FY22 is for 12.75 rupees a unit, which is up from our earlier run rate guidance of 12.4 unit and up about 6% from the FY21 initial guidance of 12 rupees a unit. This is important to note because this is adding to a trajectory of approximately 4% year-on-year growth in DPU that we have projected and delivered over the last 4 years. The next segment is on improving our balance sheet strength. We have successfully managed the first wave of COVID and 19 related uncertainties on the business by maintaining adequate liquidity and reserves with the company. Our net debt to AUM has remained at 59% as of 31st of March 2021, which leaves substantial headroom for growth. This does not account for the rights issue impact, which will be explained subsequently. We have substantially diversified our debt sources, reduced the cost, and elongated tenors in the incremental facilities that we are undertaking. We have focused tremendously on resilient asset management this year. We are transitioning into an in-house project management or asset management, as the industry calls it, and therefore Sterlite Power in FY22 will not be pursuing the project manager role. However, we would be internalizing it within the IndiGrid teams itself. We have partnered with IBM for utilizing their global tool called Maximo to digitize asset management and increase reliability and efficiency of our operations. We have made investments into emergency restoration systems to ensure reliability of our portfolio and availability. And we are focused on building a world-class EHS and ESG practices across the portfolio. The last one is on industry stewardship. So we consistently focused on reducing the lot size to allow maximum participation, increasing liquidity. And as some of you would know already, IRDAI has come up with a circular to enable debt securities, subscription to debt securities by insurance companies. And MOF has announced the similar measures for FPIs. However, we are awaiting the final circular from RBI. All of this has put together enabled us to contribute superior total returns, maintain sustainable increase in DPU, and steady operations. Going to the key power sector trends, I would just spend a few minutes here as we believe electricity sector is truly at the cusp of shift in demand patterns, technological disruptions, and regulatory dynamism in India and globally. To give a perspective, technological disruptions would mean efficiency of solar cells and in general other solar technologies reaching grid parity levels, improvement in storage technology and battery technologies, and evolution of electric mobility. The impact of these disruptions has direct result on the demand patterns. The focus on electricity in India has moved from just availability of a light to reliability and sustainability of energy delivery. Electrification of mobility will further cause huge shifts into the demand patterns in the country, to the extent that if the overall electric mobility vision is achieved, it will eat into the oil and gas share of the energy and expand the electricity sector in a material way, which would have tremendous impact on equipment manufacturer as well as infrastructure providers like ourselves. Storage requirement are becoming central to stability and reliability and such demand shifts, as well as the charging infrastructure for EV will become a much larger market in the coming future. And the last one is a regulatory dynamism that we are seeing in the government, whether it is with support in form of PLI or support in terms of planning adequate and efficient transmission system, revitalizing DISCOMs by some monetization as well as delicensing of distribution businesses, and many such light touch regulations which are supporting a decadal growth in the electricity sector. At the cusp of these three, we believe that we are looking at a decadal growth and a transformational shift in the electricity sector in India, not only for the infrastructure companies, but also for companies associated with it in terms of manufacturing, technology, and generation. Coming to the COVID impact on the business directly that we see on the next slide. The COVID per se, as we have been showing this slide, did not materially impact our business. While the demand subsequently materially dropped in COVID in 2020, it subsequently came back. It's dropped in 2021. As we can see in the green curve, we believe the moment the lockdown opens up, it will come back up. However, the main thing to note over here is that the power transmission tariffs are based on availability and are not linked to power flow and demand. And we have seen it in 2020. Our collections came back to normal and rather beating the historical average and ending the Q4 with 126% of quarterly revenue, which we believe is one of the best quarters that we have seen. And our FY21 revenues remain above 100%, which clearly showcase that the COVID impact of FY21 was not there on the business per se, besides the practical challenges of operations. In general, we are ending the year with one of the best receivable days of 41 days at the end of the quarter. The last section is on the resilient operation. I would have Satish, if you are on the call, Satish, to take through that section of resilient operations and reliability-centered management. Satish, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Hi everyone, good afternoon. So on resilient operations, I think despite of COVID challenges, we could able to maintain the reliable power supply with a maximized availability. So across the portfolio, we have achieved 99.5% against our normative availability target of 98%. Of course, there were safety issues, concerns. We have to put a lot of additional COVID-related safety measures at our facilities, including in substation and in transmission lines. And all the critical O&M activities continued with the restricted site times especially in substation operations where we have to operate 24/7. We could able to sustain and manage the operations without any much larger impact. Yeah. Harsh, back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, sir. Yeah, thank you, Satish. The next part was about on slide number 14 on in general operating performance of the year and the quarter. I think the quarterly availability, as Satish mentioned, has been as per plan, except for certain items where there are shutdown events that we need to take, but they were compensated by such regulatory authorities like MSRDC and NHAI, which requires us to move lines. In general, our performance on reliability measure is substantially improved. The number of trips per line in FY21 has come down to 0.31 from 0.48 in FY19. And further, if we remove the indemnified components, which are in some of the lines, the trips per line comes back to about 0.2, which we believe is one of the best in the industry, and we would continue to focus on that. Our safe man hours have been good. However, we did see a fatality earlier in the year for a very rare incident of honeybee bite. And we're truly committed to ensure that it does not repeat. And me and Satish and everybody at the team is focusing to ensure that we increase our training man hours to ensure that we do not see such fatality to repeat. Our solar generation is very low at some of our substations in terms of our size. However, we, as you know, we have purchased or signed to purchase the 100 megawatt of solar facility, and you will see these numbers growing materially after that. We also received ISO certification for 14,001, 45,001 from Bureau Veritas and 9,001 in the financial year 21. As I mentioned in the summary, we are transitioning our project manager agreement from Sterlite Power to IndiGrid, and IndiGrid will become self-reliant in operations and management. On the next slide is about the robust financial performance of Q4 and full financial year 21. I would invite Jyoti, who is CFO at IndiGrid, to take this slide onwards. Jyoti, over to you.
Thanks, Harsh. So on the back of very sound operational capabilities, we've sort of reflected that in our financial performance, which you can see on slide number 15. For the quarter FY21, our revenue on a year-on-year basis increased by 39%, EBITDA increased by 37%. Our NDCF, however, increased only by 8%. This is because of a few one-offs relating to some SPA earnouts, as well as some one-off DSRA creation that happened during the quarter. Adjusted for that, the NDCF accretion has also been in line. Actually, it's higher than the EBITDA generation at almost 40%. For the full year FY21, our revenues increased by 35%. And EBITDA and NDCF increased more or less in tandem at 26 and 27% respectively. As we've already announced, we have a 3.3% growth in the BPU per quarter from 3 rupees to 3 rupees 10 paisa over the course of the year. Now, this, of course, came into effect from the December quarter. So for the full year, the corresponding BPU increase is a little bit lesser, as the 3.1 rupee was paid only for 2 quarters and not for the full quarter. The increase is half of 3.3, which is 1.7%. It's showing 1%, that's a typo. But on a run rate basis, our BPU increase for FY21 is 3.3% at a 3.1 into 4, 12.4 rupees for the year versus 12 rupees that we used to pay before that. And as Harsh has already guided, we plan to increase the DPU to 12.75 or roughly 3.1875 rupees, which will be a further increase of roughly around 3%. So overall, an increase of 6% from the start of the year till the end of the year. Our AUM growth has been remarkable at 71%, and we are today commanding an AUM upwards of 20,000 crores, roughly 20,500 crores. We go to the next slide, which is essentially a bridge between EBITDA to NDCF. It is more or less explanatory, but I'll take you through some of the key highlights here. On the quarter, I'd like to highlight the working capital movement, which is a very big positive of 160 crores. This was on the back of an exceptional quarter in terms of collection. We collected the highest ever, in a quarter compared to the last 4 years at 126%. and that led to significant drawing down of the debtors and cash coming into the books. That helped us for an NDCF at an SPV level, which was higher than the EBITDA. So against a 451 crore EBITDA at the SPV level, our NDCF was actually higher at 475 crores. Adjusted for the interest cost, debt repayment, DSRA, etc. at the IGT level, we generated an NDCF at IGT of 226 crores, out of which we intend to pay out the 217 crores of DPU at 3 rupees 10 paisa on the expanded equity base of 70 crores. So it's important to note that for this quarter, we've created an NDCF reserve of almost 62 crores, about 53 crores at the SPV level, and about 9 crores at the IGT level. For the full year, the corresponding reserve is 170 crores, about 143 crore at the SPV level, and a 27 crore at the IGT level. Now, this NDCF reserve will help us to tide over any sort of disruption in the collection cycle, which may or may not happen in the future. As of now, we don't see any challenges. Collections seem to be following the course, but should there be any challenges, then this NDCF reserve will help us to tide over and smooth out the predictable DPU that we have always envisaged to maintain. We go to the next slide. Harsh, you want to take the distribution strategy, please?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I think on slide 17 on distribution, as we have stated, we are focused on delivering 12.75 rupees a unit for next financial year. And for the current financial year, the quarter 4, we have decided to distribute 3.1 rupees a unit, which consists of 1.51 rupees as interest, 0.52 rupee per unit as dividend, which is under the old tax regime, so therefore tax-free, capital repayment of about 1.07 rupees. And this will also be you'll also receive an advice with the similar numbers in your mailbox along with the DPU. I think with this, we have cumulatively delivered about 45.77 rupees a unit and approximately 2,000 crores of distribution to investors since listing. I think it is important to note that this distribution and the guidance are on a much higher outstanding unit holder base. Earlier, we had 58.35 crore of unit outstanding, whereas in this quarter, in quarter 4, we have 70.02 crore unit outstanding, and we are delivering the same 3.1 rupees a quarter for the entire unit holder base. And the guidance of 12.75 will also remain on the entire unit holder base. There is Jyoti would take the next one, 18, 19, or?
Yeah, I can take the next two slides. So the next one, slide 18, is the adjusted NAV. The way the InvIT regulations work is that when you acquire an asset where you are the majority holder, then you consolidate the debt as well as the AUM or the value of the asset 100% in the books. Consequent to that, the NAV at the end of Q4 is at 146.26. This includes 100% of both PRKTCL as well as, more importantly, NER. Now, for NER, while we've acquired 74% in tranche 1, there is a plan to acquire 100% of the asset, and that transaction for the balance 26% is due to happen in quarter 1 of FY22. While the equity value adjusted for debt has been consolidated 100%, there is a payout that needs to be made for the 26% that we'll acquire in this first quarter, which would lead to an adjustment in the net asset value to the tune of roughly about 8 rupees. Then there has also been a rights issue, as you are aware, 1,283 crores, which will have a dilutory impact because of the same valuation is going to be distributed on a larger number of units. And that impact will be about 6 rupees. So on a pro forma basis, the 146.26 rupees of NAV per unit would actually translate to about 132.18 rupees, And we thought in the light of fair disclosure and full transparency, this is a fact that we wanted to bring to the notice of our unit holders to be mindful of.
Sorry, just to add on that, Jyoti, I think as you ended up rightly, this is as per the valuer report, our NAV statutorily remains 146.26. However, as we speak today, there are two, as Jyoti described, we wanted to be more transparent and disclose the Q1 events, which has dilutory impact. And we believe that that's something which unit holders should be aware of. Therefore, it is provided that these are the two events which has impact on the downward side on the NAV that is published. And to make it clear, NER is acquired, so 100% economic interest of NER is acquired and is accruing to IndiGrid. However, the payment which is not made at the moment, which is what Jyoti described, that we would be paying subsequently in Q1 or subsequent timeline as and when certain conditions are met by Sterlite Power.
Thanks, Harsh, for that explanation. I'll move to the next slide, slide number 19, which talks about our finance structure, the capital structure on the debt side. So we have a gross borrowing of roughly around 12,800 crores at the end of March. This is adjusted for some amount of debt which got paid in the first week of April. In the quarter, we raised about 5,100 crores of debt, and this was primarily because of NER, which got consummated in the last week of March. And about 1,000 crore we raised for the purpose of refinancing debt at the SPV level. Now, this debt we raised at an average incremental cost of about 7.36%, which stands very well compared to the average overall book cost of 7.93%. So over the course of the entire financial year, we've been able to refinance debt at a lower level so that our average cost continues to go down. At the start of the quarter, our cost was about 8.29% for the overall book, which now is less than 8%. And in the month of April, May, we have also been able to do a public NCD issuance where we were able to raise about 1,000 crore for 7 years and beyond, average maturity of roughly around 8 to 9 years at a cost of about 8%. And what that has done is that has made us capable of extending our tenures of the debt book so that we are able to raise incremental debt for 7 years and beyond at lower cost. So today, as we speak, we are in a position to raise incremental debt between 7 to 10 year maturities at plus minus about 7.5%. And as more and more of our book gets churned over and new debt comes into the fold at that rate, our average cost of debt should also be going down from the current 7.93% to maybe trending down to 7.5% over the next couple of quarters. We continue to be rated AAA. We have a fixed rate borrowing of more than 80%, it's almost 83-84%, and roughly 60% of our book is in the form of NCDs and the balance is in the form of loans. We're carrying a cash balance of about 965 crores at the end of March, but this includes the DPU to be paid of 217 crores, as well as restricted cash in the form of DSRA of about 300 crores. So adjusted for that, the cash that we are carrying, which is sort of free surplus cash, is about 450 crores, which on a book of about 13,000 crore translates to about 3.5%, which is a right or fair amount of cash that we believe we should carry given the overall size of the operations. Our net debt to AUM is at about 59%. Now this will be going down as because of the rights issue that we have done in the month of April. But as of 31st March, it stands at 59%. Our interest coverage ratio is actually 1.52. There's a typo here. It should be 1.5, more than 1.5. It's about 1.52. Now, in terms of the repayment schedule, which you can see at the bottom half of the slide, because of the ability to raise debt beyond 7 years that we have enabled, we should be able to refinance all our debt in that kind of a maturity bucket and extend the maturity so that but for FY23, we believe by September, all the repayments in any financial year will not exceed 1,500 crores. That will be roughly around 12 to 13% of our book. And we believe that is the right kind of level of refinancing or repayment that are due in every year that we should have. And we would proactively ensure that it doesn't go above the 1,500 crore mark in any particular year. As far as FY23 is concerned, there is a large amount of debt of 2,600 crore which is coming for a repayment. This includes two chunky NCDs, one for 1,400 and another for nearly 700 crores, which we can refinance now, but these have been locked in at higher rates of interest, and so there would be a significant amount of break cost or prepayment cost that we'll have to bear. So the way we will manage this particular refinancing is that we are proactively working with banks for an advanced tie-up of a loan facility, which is a longer availability period, which we hopefully should tie up during the course of the year, so that we have this facility in advance rather than raise this money closer to the maturity date. We are also, to the extent possible, refinancing as much of the FY23 debt piece, and we should be able to do at least 200 to 250 crores over the next quarter. Harsh, you want to take the next slide?
Sure. And adding to what, where Jyoti ended, I think where we are in terms of our ratings, the rate cycle and the opportunity, we believe that this 2,600 crores in FY23 is a very good opportunity to reduce our cost of debt further, because these are the bonds which were locked in about a couple of years ago with a much higher cost of debt and then our incremental cost of debt. So we believe that this is going to result into a good chunk of savings for the coming years too. On the next one, I think there are two strategic capital raise that we did, and one Jyoti already spoke about, but I think some of the statistics on public debt is mentioned over here. I think the key objective of that was to diversify our source of debt, extend the average maturities of our borrowing, and increase the market depth for the capital raises. And we saw that against a token of a smaller issue, we received a 25 times demand of about 2,500 crore, and we completed 1,000 crore for the full green shoe subscription. And over 11,500 applications were received for the debt issue. And majority, which is more than 80% of the subscription as we saw, has been in the 7 or greater than 7-year tenor. And that's something which we believe achieved our objective of really establishing a long-term tenor in the market for IndiGrid papers. And the average maturity of allocation that we achieved is 8.6 years. And this also now includes 4 insurance companies who have chosen to purchase our papers on the longer tenors. And this is just important thing. This is just a few days after IRDAI enabling such ability of insurance companies to subscribe to our debt papers. And we are pretty encouraged and happy about such strong demand from long-term capital. On the rights issue side, I think this was the first ever rights issue done by a public listed entity. And this is the first call. After that, we are talking about the rights issue to investors. And our objective was to ensure that we preemptively capitalize ourselves, to ensure that we are able to grow when the market is right. This rights issue has helped us create leverage headroom for further growth, and also offered opportunity to all our shareholders to participate and contribute in the growth journey of IndiGrid. Our rights issue got subscribed by 1.25 times. And what was heartening to know is over 90% of the eligible investors chose to subscribe to our rights issue, and which we believe is a very good number. And then we see it as a sign of confidence in the IndiGrid platform from our investors. With the capital that we have raised at the rights issue, we would be able to acquire another 5,000 odd crores of assets while remaining within the 70% leverage that we have kept for ourselves. The next slide is more a long-term track record of delivering returns, and as we have been consistently maintaining, InvIT and especially IndiGrid is focused on delivering superior total returns, which consist of dividend distributions or other distribution per unit plus price appreciation or change in price. With the comparable indices and stocks that we have been consistently showing over last several quarters, we still remain at a substantially higher spread of what we have delivered in terms of annualized return over last 4 years since our listing. Important to note, majority part of this return are getting delivered by virtue of our stable distribution and not just the price change. And that's something which also contributes to a lower beta or lower volatility in total returns and the price of IndiGrid. Coming to slide number 23, which is the outlook for FY22. We believe that there is about 50,000 crores of interstate TBCB pipeline and another 45,000 crores of intrastate TBCB business that is expected over the next 3 to 4 years. This forms a very healthy pipeline for acquisition. Within the interstate transmission bids, we see approximately 15,000 worth of bids coming in FY22. And additionally, about 26,000 crores are identified for 20 gigawatt of renewable power plant, which may come in the subsequent years. Our focus will be on completing the acquisition that we have signed up for, called FRV, as well as converting the framework asset KTL into our portfolio by year end. We will continue to selectively evaluate opportunities in both solar and transmission sector. And the outlook is to increase our DPU to 12.75 and we'll work towards delivering the same. On the balance sheet side, we'll try to further diversify our debt sources and elongate tenors. We will aim to reduce our cost of debt by refinancing. We will maintain adequate liquidity to mitigate current uncertainties and any unpredictable scenario that may pan out due to COVID or other than COVID over the next 12 months. On the asset management side, we'll continue to maintain a robust availability and maximize incentives. We would be investing both in technology and people to ensure reliable and self-reliant O&M. We will continue to make investments into leading technologies like digital asset management or predictive analytics and emergency preparedness to ensure that we are able to operate our assets reliably. We would focus on EHS and ESG practices for the portfolio in line with global practices for similar platforms. On the industry stewardship, we'll continue to liaise with regulators and ministry to reduce the lot size at par with other listed platforms to ensure the liquidity increases and improves for InvITs. There are further changes that we are seeking for PFRDA to subscribe to debt securities for InvIT and also actioning of MOF circular on FPI and ECB lending. And we are recommending government to streamline tax anomalies with respect to capital gains tax for InvITs. With that, I would just conclude the call by saying we are really happy to have such a wide participation and performance. We look forward to answer your questions now.
Should we start with the...
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We will now begin the question and answer session. Anyone who wishes to ask a question may press star and 1 on their touchtone telephone. If you wish to remove yourself from the question queue, you may press star and 2. Participants are requested to use handsets while asking a question. Ladies and gentlemen, we will wait for a moment while the question queue assembles. The first question is from the line of Mohit Kumar from DAM Capital. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening, sir, and congratulations on good set of numbers and raising the capital. Sir, 2 questions. Firstly, why we are maintaining such a high level of cash on our books? And the related question is that, of course, we have around 24 billion of repayment due in FY23. When do you expect it to refinance? Can you sense the timeline?
Sure. So I think Jyoti did explain partly, but we'll try to do it again. I think the high level of cash, I think we need to reduce certain cash. So out of the 965 crores of cash, about 220 crores is the distribution held for this payment, which would bring it to about 750 crores. Out of that, approximately 300 crores is a statutory DSRA. We maintain a 1 quarter of interest cover every time at any point in time, which reduces by another 300 crores. So this is about like 520 crores out of 960 crore is kind of either cash flow which we are distributing to subsequent investors and for debt service. Out of the other 400 crores that you see, there's one way to look at it. There is a reserve that we have created in this financial year. So approximately 170 crores, right? That's a reserve that is created which we can use subsequently. So we have approximately, other than these three, about 200-300 crores of excess cash, which we, depending on the opportunity, we can either use it or we keep it. That's a flexibility. So I don't think we should look at it as a 960 crores of cash balance. The real flexibility on cash balance is just about 200-300 crores. And we have an upcoming acquisition also coming, right, for FRV that we have signed. So we will decide to use it for either upcoming acquisitions or refinancing that may come up. So the next question that you asked was on 2,400 crores of repayment in 23. See, both of them are coming for next financial year. So any refinancing that we do for that amount would largely happen in the Q4 of FY22. Because they are, as Jyoti mentioned, they are locked NCDs and the breakage costs are higher. So we would be doing it somewhere in the Q4 of FY22.
Okay, understood, sir. And sir, what will be your debt equity post the acquisition of KTL and FRV? In the sense that you raised also with rights issue, you raised 283 crore, right? So post the KTL and Solar FRV, I think that should happen in the next 12 months. What will be the and also the NER? I think we need to pay something, right?
Yeah.
So after making all the payments, what will be debt equity at the end of FY22?
Yeah. So I would just say one, after the rights issue, our net debt to AUM is at about 55%, okay, approximately. And considering the size of both the other assets, overall AUM would probably be in the range of 60% after these two acquisitions. Jyoti, if we can, does this seem right, about 60%?
60%? Yeah, you're right. I mean, it would be about that kind of a level. Immediate visibility is around 55% post this quarter, because rights as well as FRV we are expecting to happen in this quarter. KTL will happen a little bit later, but it will be within the 60% threshold, based on current visibility of the acquisition pipeline.
So there will be 10% extra margin available to us, right? Post this.
Yes.
Understood, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Prashant Pandey from Birla Sun Life Insurance. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir. So my query is basically on the return of capital which you have given in this quarter. So how is it predictive? Was there any specific reason in terms of debt maturity was coming up for the loan which was given to SPVs? And also, what is the future outlook? How much capital return can we expect going forward?
Okay. So I think this is not linked to any specific maturities, etc., as we have described earlier. This is linked to primarily one factor, that under the tax regime and the InvIT regulations, we need to do return of capital, or rather we need to distribute to our investors the cash that we receive from SPV, same form as the other payment. So for example, in a particular year or a quarter, if one SPV generates more cash than the interest that it has to pay to IndiGrid, in that quarter, we may see some capital repayment happening. It is not a uniform, but so some SPV will do it, some SPV will do it after 10 years, it depends on the capital structure of the SPV per se. So whenever we receive a cash inflow into an SPV more than the interest payment that it owes to IndiGrid, you will see this component coming in. It is just an accounting treatment. It is not a buyback or a capital repayment in the true sense. It is just a capital repayment because subsidiary has returned the debt to InvIT, and InvIT is paying back the same. In this quarter, the number is relatively higher. As you would have seen, there is substantially higher collection that has taken place, right? So when you receive more collection, there is more NDCF, and the interest is accounting, so we can only pay X amount of interest. The rest of it comes to us as a capital repayment. On the outlook in future, there would be components of capital repayment which would be there, but it is not. It is very difficult to predict it on a year-on-year basis that, 1 rupee ka hoga ki 2 ka hoga. It's very difficult. So we have focused on, following the rules that is there in the SEBI regulations and the income tax. But prediction of that is difficult early on.
Okay, sir. Thank you. And my second and final question was on the NDCF. If you see on page number 15 and 16, the NDCF is different. So I wanted to understand, as in, why is there a difference? Is it because one is at the SPV level and another is at the InvIT level?
Correct. So there are two ways to look at it. Is one is it at the InvIT level in terms of after creating reserves, and second is that what you see on the slide number 16 is just a waterfall from EBITDA to NDCF, right? Of how what are the changes, etc. It is not a technical formula of NDCF that gets followed under SEBI, because SEBI requires to have two levels of NDCF separately communicated, and so what is NDCF for IGT is after adjustment of 10% of reserve at SPV. So you need to make certain adjustments to map it to the FY21 NDCF of 917, which is the total cash generation that has happened in the company.
So the 90% regulation is for the lower amount, is 775.
90% is on both amounts, NDCF at SPV as well as NDCF at IGT.
Okay, thank you, sir.
If I may explain in a simple way, both of them are actually representing the same number. The method of representation is different. So if you look at the slide number 16, if you take the distributed amount and just add the reserves for the quarter and for the year, you will get the total NDCF number which is there on slide 15. So slide 15 is talking about the overall NDCF generated, including the reserves, and the breakup of that NDCF is shown on slide 16.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Antal Thakkar from
Yes.
Lalkar Securities. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. So congratulations, Harsh and team, on a blowout year and quarter after such a unpredictable year. My question is actually in continuation to the previous one. So while I understand that the capital repayment may not have a predictability, but can we assume that the dividend will have a predictability going forward?
Yeah. So on the dividend front, it is a very specific scenario for which we can provide a little bit of guidance on. The dividend is coming from the joint venture called Parbati Koldam, which we acquired from Reliance Infra, which is a cost-plus asset. And in a cost-plus regulated return asset, we receive post-tax return from the regulator and the customers. So there is a specific amount of dividend that we receive every year from that joint venture. And that would amount to approximately 50 paisa a year kind of dividend for the platform, which is about 30 to 35 crores. And that is something which will continue for a longer period of time. So the dividend component will be more sustainable and more predictable in the range of 0.45 to 0.6 rupees a unit per year.
Okay, wonderful. And the second question I had, with the increased guidance at 12.75 for FY22, the first quarter you were paying out 3.1, and therefore would it be safe to assume that the balance will be caught up by the end of the year?
Okay. No. So for the guidance, we are following an accrual method. So the 3.1 that we are paying is for quarter four of last year. So the 12.75 will be from the NDCF of the financial year 22. So depending on how you account for it, it will go. So quarter four DPU is 3.1, but quarter one FY22 onwards, it will be a higher DPU.
Oh, right. Sorry, my apologies. All right. So the next full year will be 12.75.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Sarvesh Gupta from Maximal Capital. Please go ahead.
Hi, Harsh, and thanks for taking my question. So after this tax rule which got changed for dividend distribution, many of the REITs, which are listed ones, had, changed the mix of distribution to their unit holders, and also have given some guidance on the same, on an increased distribution as a percentage of total distribution. So it seems that there is some financial engineering and flexibility to sort of change the mix to the unit holders, which of course have been proven by all the listed REITs in India. So given that, do we also have that flexibility? Because and hence, if we have that flexibility, would we want to give any guidance on the mix of these three forms of distribution going forward?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. I'll just start from saying that REITs and InvITs follow a different capital structure. It's directionally. What happens in real estate is that typically the asset value is much higher than the book value. And because of that, in any case, they had to pay dividend even earlier, even though it was taxable. So for them, what has only changed is that from a taxable dividend, they are moving slightly and making it towards, tax-free dividend, depending on the cap structure of different SPVs. However, for InvITs or other, let's say, infrastructure businesses, typically the capital structure and book value are not materially different than like real estate. So what happens is that we have a lot of depreciation cash flow available to us, which on a real estate, the depreciation percentage of the overall asset value is lower. So we are kind of restricted to follow a particular cap structure, which would eventually result into a material part of our distribution coming as interest. So we do not have the same kind of flexibility to move to a dividend structure, and we believe that is better for InvITs or rather IndiGrid for sure, because if we were to move to that kind of structure, the overall cash flows will come down materially, because then we'll need to start paying 25% tax, to that extent to be able to generate same amount of, dividend. So we have done those calculations, and we believe that that's something not feasible for IndiGrid. However, it can be case by case for different people. Even the dividend that we are providing is specifically coming from a cost plus asset. That's why we are being able to deliver that dividend.
Understood. And the other thing is, so basically for further increase on DPU is in a way dependent on the incremental IRRs, project IRRs that you are bidding versus the cost of debt. So this spread, how are you seeing that in the market relative to previous years? Given the gush of liquidity everywhere in the world, are you seeing pressures on the incremental spreads for the newer things that you are bidding versus your cost of debt?
Correct. No, I think it's a very, very pertinent question. First point, I think we acquired NER just at the end of the last financial year. So for the near-term DPU growth, we are not dependent on new asset acquisitions, because our high confidence guidance comes from the fact that we have the assets that we have already acquired, on the back of which we are providing the DPU guidance. So our near-term DPU growth is not dependent on asset acquisitions. To answer your second question, certainly the competition and in general, I would say capital availability in the country has increased. and which would result into, I would say, relatively narrower spreads on acquisitions. However, I mean, it depends on what is the particular situation. Let's say whether there is a stressed asset or an operating asset, or a particular asset in which you already have synergies on, etc. So it depends on asset to asset. But in general, directionally, yes, competition has increased, spreads have narrowed down. That is when we believe platforms like IndiGrid are more competitive because of our rating, because of our balance sheet strength, because of our track record of acquisitions, because we can turn around acquisitions faster, and speed is definitely one of the criteria that we have seen has worked well in terms of competitive scenario. Because eventually the sellers do want a solution then faster rather than waiting for a year, because the economic situations can change materially in a year. So, and the tax part, where we can have a better IRR just because the way we are structured in comparison to a legal entity which is structured differently. So I would say we remain to be competitively well placed on account of our rating, balance sheet strength, turnaround capability and track record, and our tax structure.
Understood. And last question on the acquisition pipeline. Now we only hear what is actually accepted and closed. But I mean, how often do you reject acquisition of an asset? Are the assets mostly homogeneous, so all it requires is a good deal around it, or are there really assets which are bad as well? Because we keep hearing that everything that you are considering, gets acquired in a way. So yeah. How often do you reject, and what causes rejections? And if you can throw some rejection ratio, etc.
Yeah. So okay. So I don't have a specific rejection ratio, to be honest, to give you a specific number. But I think I'll answer a second question first, which will address the first one, is that assets are homogeneous. If you look at our portfolio today, about 95% of our assets are under same type of contractual framework, right? Which is interstate transmission service, receive similar kind of cash flows, etc., similar kind of technology, etc. So effectively, the filtration is very simple. As long as it is this part of the contract, we like these contracts, we believe they are very strong, we don't need to reject the asset. The next level comes in terms of quality of work and execution. And typically, there are about 2 to 5% range of outcomes that we see in quality of execution between different projects. And that gets adjusted in the value. That if you correct, 2% of extra work and the asset will become good. Those kind of changes. So if it is an interstate TBCB asset, which is clean operating asset, it is an easier decision for us. We do not need to reject it. Right? Solar is slightly trickier and materially different than TBCB. So we have been very selective over there. We do not pick up assets with, I would say, relatively weaker counterparties, right? So, and that ratio would be very high, right? Most of the projects that are there today have a substantial amount of state counterparty risk, and we do not even pursue those projects. So there's, I would say, I won't call it a rejection, but we filter it out. We don't bid for those projects. Okay? Coming to the narrower pipeline, if it is a SECI project, well-built project, NTPC project, well-built, good quality modules, etc., then we pursue that project. Eventually, we may not get it on account of several things, because let's say we don't like the quality of certain aspects. We'll put a higher risk premium to it and a higher cost of correction, and maybe we are, bidded out. But the criteria for rejection for us are largely around the counterparties that we don't like and we don't work with, as well as if there are material issues with the contracts which cannot be corrected for any commercial measures.
Understood. What are the tangible and intangible benefit of this making the project management in-house? And would it be given to the investment manager or which entity?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
the project management which has been transferred from Sterlite Power to I don't know which entity, what is the tangible saving per year and what is the intangible benefit of doing this?
Okay. So one, it is not with investment manager. It is within the IndiGrid entities itself. So there is no external economics going to any other person. In terms of, I would say, tangible benefits, I would say there is no tangible savings on this account. Right? We were anyways paying about 10% of O&M cost to Sterlite Power, and we would need to incur minimum that, if not more, to have a similar kind of platform working for us. Right? So I don't think there is a commercial saving on that account. In terms of intangible, there are many advantages. It's a large operation that we are running, and the accountability should remain with the IndiGrid teams instead of outsourcing it with external members or agencies. So we needed to build that strength. Second, it also addresses our risk management, that our own teams are managing our assets and we have better confidence, better control and governance around it. And the third one is to ensure that, if we invest in people over the longer term, then over a longer period of time, the cost of operations will go down. That's the third one. Instead of just changing contractors and AMCs. So I think these are the three intangible benefits, I would say, for changing the project manager.
Understood. Thanks a lot for answering all the questions and all the best for the coming quarter.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Ruhi Pabari from Reliance Nippon Life Insurance. Please go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am, you are.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for taking my question. So, firstly, congratulations on the good set of numbers. I have a basic questions with respect to the DPU classification. I understand, and if I may have just missed it earlier, I understand you said this is more of an accounting entry. There is no actual repayment which is happening in terms of a debt. So when an SPV is generating some amount of cash and it is generating cash more than its interest payment, that's when this capital repayment is happening, is what I understood from the initial part of the call. So when that is happening, why does my interest component in the DPU has to go down?
Okay. So I think that's a very, very, very smart question. So, see, we create, there are two concepts I would like to bring to fore to explain that. One is a concept of reserve, right? So, we at IndiGrid level, we have flexibility to do 10% of NDCA, 10% of reserve creation half-yearly basis at SPV as well as IndiGrid, right? So, we do not need to completely translate into a mirror image of what we have received and exactly as is being. Right? It can be proportionate because we create reserves. Second, there is a context of allocation of expenses that we need to follow from tax perspective. So when, at conceptual level, when an InvIT receives its income in form of interest, it needs to set that off against the interest expense that InvIT incurred. When it receives in terms of principal, it needs to follow similar kind of principle of allocation, and same for dividend. So we internally follow a particular allocation method of expenses at InvIT level, which would mean that what is the attributability of that income and expense at InvIT level correspondingly, and then the residual amount is paid. So it's difficult to exactly match it on the call like this, but it is to follow an attributability of income and expense concept at InvIT level, which is what causes this difference. So in reality, we have 170 crores of reserve also that we have created in FY21, right? That will also have certain amount of interest and principal repayment or other capital repayment and dividend repayment. That would be used subsequently as and when we utilize these reserves to pay further.
Okay, understood. Right. Okay. Yeah. And in terms of the capital repayment, just one more thing I wanted to understand is that how is this, is this capital repayment taxable at the marginal rates in the hands of the unit holders, or how does that treatment go?
So, see, it is difficult to address the exact taxability for me on the call, but I'll describe how, because even the manager has received as an owner of IndiGrid units this capital repayment. It goes out of the cost of acquisition for the buyer.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Thank you so much for your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Sudhir Beda from Right Time Consultancy. Please go ahead.
Sir, congratulations on superb set of numbers. And sir, congratulations to you and your entire team for outstanding management and unparalleled return in the last 3 years, sir. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, thank you.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir, you're
Yes, you're audible.
Please proceed with your question.
Yeah. So, sir, my questions are two questions. First, what is the reserve? See, you have created 170 crore for the year FY21. So, what is the total reserve we have created so far in last 3 years or 3.5 years?
It is 170 crores. It is 170 crores. It is same, 170 crores. So, in starting of FY21, we did not have any reserve. Now we have created that reserve.
And sir, my second question is there any inter-SPV transfer of loans? Suppose one SPV some sort of liquidity, then another SPV who is with excess liquidity transfer the amount to another SPV. Those kind of transactions are there in this this trust at the SPV level?
No, we prefer, technically we can do it, but we prefer to avoid any such inter-SPV transactions. If at all there is a need, InvIT itself gives a loan or takes the loan back, because InvIT itself carries a lot of liquidity. But we avoid
that should be the way.
SPV transaction.
Because other InvITs are doing like this, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, but it makes the accounting very complex, and there are tax impacts and many other impacts, so we have been avoiding it.
Oh, that's good, sir. Thanks, and sir, thank you for taking my question, sir, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Mulay Savla from Shah and Savla LLP. Please go ahead.
RTS, congratulations, sir, on an excellent set of numbers, and thanks for giving guidance for higher DPU. Most of my questions have been answered, sir, but just a passing guidance from you. May I know what is the rationale behind distributing income even on the right list also? Because as I believe the income is to be distributed, as you said, for the year Q4 of last year, and rights were concluded in the month of April current financial year. So may I just have some understanding on that, please?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There is no rationale. We have just followed the regulations as is. We could not have avoided the rights issue owners to not receive the income, because the unit holders who are entitled for distribution are the unit holders who are there on the record date, whether rights or preferreds or any other unit holders. So there was no way for us to exclude those investors, or the alternative way to consider is to say rights pricing of 110 would have factored this distribution also coming to them, right? So we can look at it both ways.
No, but I think, sir, we could have had a separate icing number for the right unit, and probably, I feel that there will be some minority unit holders who may not have applied, presuming that against one unit, one lot, I may or may not get one lot. So there are chances that few of them may not have applied, and they may be deprived of this additional benefit.
No, so I'm trying to understand why is it an additional benefit? Because even if the unit holder who did not apply will still get the 3.1 rupees a quarterly distribution. They are not getting lesser.
No, that's right. But if they would have applied and they would have obtained the similar additional lot, they would have got higher dividend or the higher distribution.
No, you're right. But that's what is the unfortunate reality of SEBI regulations, right? That we had to do regulation, we had to do rights issue within the lot size multiples,
Correct.
which is beyond control of the company. In addition to that, we still need to follow the regulations of record date of dividend, right? Even in the company, if the rights issue was done early, the company cannot choose different dividends for different investors, right? Investors has the same legal right and standing, whether they have come via rights issue or preference issue. So unfortunately, the company does not have these flexibilities to decide ki rights issue investors should get less or more. And the way the regulations are defined, the company could not do rights issue in a way that, a normal equity rights issue happened. So in both cases...
Sir, I agree, but I'm sure the regulations, whatever they may be saying, if company would have thought of, probably company would have come up with the board meeting and record date before the allotment of the rights unit, or maybe right units would have had the different ISIN number. I'm sure.
Let me explain in two ways, right? One, it is not prudent for company to take decisions based on the record dates, right? If we do that, we put the company at risk on market flows, right? What if after 2 months the markets are bad, right? So we cannot take that risk. Second, this anomaly will accrue anytime we do the rights issue. For example, let us say the record date for this quarter is 2nd June, right? Today, or let's say next few days, right? So after record day, we announce a rights issue, right? Let's say 3rd June. Okay. Right. The rights issue will get concluded by when? In next 30 days.
Right.
Right? जो भी allotment वगैरह सब करा करोगे, right? It will take 30 days. We will be standing in 30th June, right? The same investors will get Q1 ka DPU. Same impact will repeat. Whichever date you pick up for rights issue, whichever date in the calendar year, investors, we cannot time it exactly. Any time you pick up, the subsequent capitalist investors will have this advantage, right?
Never mind. Yes.
So that's a procedural flaw which a company can't change around, right? So.
All right. No, but excellent, and wish you all the very best for the work that is being carried on. So continue to carry on the excellent work. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Pratik Kothari from Unique PMS. Please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Harsh, and thank you for the opportunity. Harsh, regarding the capital repayment, to put it in a different way, let's assume if the collection wouldn't have been so high, our reserve creation would have been a smaller amount and we would have received a higher amount as interest for this quarter?
Yeah. So a higher amount, let's talk percentages, right? In crore terms, you would not receive higher amount, but in percentage terms, it would be a higher interest component. That's correct.
Had the collection not been so higher, we did 26%, correct, right?
Exactly.
It's only received a higher cash amount this year. We have chosen to create reserve and to use that reserves in future, whatever that might be, to return or acquire whatever.
Correct.
Fine. Fair enough. Fine. And Harsh, my second question is, what would be our portfolio IRR or as a unit holder, maybe at 100 rupees or at NAV level or at current price?
The IRR is a very, very, I would say, floating term, right? Very difficult for me to guide on because of, one, as you rightly put in, at what price. Second is at what leverage. Third is at which assets to include or not to include, right? So, for example, if we include, if you only include the current assets, or we include KTL or FRV, or if we don't include, even if we include KTL and FRV, will still be 60% levered, which is not a optimal case of 70%. So IRR assumptions vary materially between different people, right? So it's tough to comment for us on IRR specifically. What we can guide on is obviously DPU and growth, right? And across the world, platforms with track record of delivering DPU and growth on the yield front get valued as dividend plus growth, right? What is the total return is what is the distribution that is made by such platform plus the growth track record, right? With now such a long track record of performance, I think what is more relevant is distribution plus growth in terms of return parameters. It's almost akin to an EPS to that extent, if one can, think about it. It's like EPS plus EPS growth. Similarly, in which it's DPU plus DPU growth, right, as a way of valuation. Because IRR per se is very, very floating, right, which assumption ke mutabik IRR numbers will vary so much that it won't make sense.
But is it not possible to share what the IRR is as of, say, 31st March 2021 when we close it? And you maybe give it at 100 rupees and every investor based on their purchase price can readjust the IRR.
No, so we publish a value report, right? So our valuation report as on 31st of March 2021 has all the disclosures about the asset. The EBITDA, the revenue, the cost, everything is there, right? But what we don't forecast is interest assumption, leverage assumption, repayment assumptions. That is something which each investor will have to take a decision on, right? Because we cannot guide on that. And therefore we cannot guide on IRR. But you can construct the same model with, a little bit of assumptions of your own side based on our guidance, right? To create what is the IRR in the platform. Because, so there is enough material in the public eye for one to calculate IRR. But we cannot guide that what is the right IRR because then we are saying what are the assumptions of it, right? Which is not a management can guide on that.
Fair enough, rightly so. Thanks. Sir, and Harsh, my last question. In the presentation, we have mentioned some one-time adjustment on account of change in law in BETCL. So if you can just explain what is that and the quantum of the thing?
So this is about, there is a one-time change in law income that we received, which we had to also give it to Sterlite Power because we acquired this asset from Sterlite Power. So we received this income in our P&L and passed it on as an expense to Sterlite Power, which is a one-time and therefore it, is a comparable quarterly or annual financials gets distorted with that. The specific number is approximately 60 crore of one-time income that we have booked and a similar number of expense that we would have booked.
Harsh, the income that we booked is
about
42,
40. Yeah, go on, Jyoti.
42, and the expenditure that we had booked is about 68. So that is the one-off item that has been booked in this quarter.
Okay, fair enough. Sure. So thank you. Congratulations for such a wonderful performance and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Ravish Chandra, an individual investor. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Harsham, first congratulations. I am attending all the con calls since 18. I remember you used to say that we'll reach 20,000 crores by 2023. It's excellent. You are done well within the planned or the scheduled time. Second thing is I appreciate your inclusive team now, like Satish, for the project management included, which will give a lot of intangible benefit like, okay, for next asset acquisition, you have that capability of managing yourself. So I appreciate inclusiveness because, of course, INVT requires three major one is debt ratio or debt interest reduction. Second one is getting more AUM into the place. And third one is operation management. In all three, good job. Most of the questions answered, but I have one more doubt. This till today, we are king. We are only INVT, but now we have a competitor. Harsha, will you think that this competition, one more INVT is in the place, so further acquisition going from 20,000 crore to 30,000 crores will be a hurdle of competition in the AUM purchase rate?
Okay. So, no, thanks a lot, Ravish. I think first question is about the competition and growth. So, see, we do not have special hard-coded targets that we have to reach a particular AUM number. And that's what allows us flexibility to choose the right asset at the right cost of capital. Second, on the other InvITs, etc., the competition is not just from InvITs. Right? Competition is from non-InvITs also, strategics also. So that remains, I would say, remains the thing that we keep evaluating. However, we believe the focus of any PSU InvIT is going to remain on acquiring assets from its sponsor, then really going out and acquiring assets from the market. That is something we believe is not the focus of public InvITs or PSU InvITs. However, we cannot comment on their behalf, but to a similar InvIT in case of an auction, with our track record, with our governance and our agility, our ability to turn around is something which is typically valued highly for sellers. So we do not see it as an incremental competition, but doesn't mean there is no competition. There is already competition from other strategic owners of transmission assets, other financial platforms. So it is just continuing in that manner. We do not feel that there is an incremental competition because of an PSU InvIT. Rather, we feel that with more InvITs coming, there is going to be better liquidity, better understanding about InvITs in the market in general, and it's going to overall help everyone.
Seems like we lost the line for the current participant. We move to the next question from the line of Mohit Kumar from DAM Capital. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
You spoke about a number of policy initiatives which you are waiting for. Can you list out the last few of them? I didn't get the last one where you said the anomaly to capital gains. What are you referring to especially?
So this is referring to the point that, on InvITs, listed InvITs, we pay on trading, there is a security transaction tax that gets levied and investor pay that. Typically, it is levied on the equity stocks, and that's InvITs are trading on the equity index, so that is the right thing to do. However, when it comes to the long-term capital gains tax treatment, for InvITs, the period considered for long-term holding is 36 months, which is more akin to a debt fund than equity. So for InvITs, at the moment, there is worst of both, that there is a security transaction tax like equity, but the holding period is like debt fund. So we have been proposing to the ministry and several regulatory bodies to streamline the anomaly. We believe it should trade at equity level. We believe it should be, STT should be leviable. But then 36 months should not be a holding period to compute long-term capital gains tax. It should be in line with the equity long-term tax treatment, which is 12 months.
Understood. Are you expecting any other policy, changes which will over the next 12 months?
No, so I think our focus is just on enablement of PF capital also to debt securities. That's one, but I don't think it's kind of changing the game materially. And the second one is reduction of lot size, which is one big initiative that we are working on. This is the two ones that I can think of.
So lastly, we have an asset with the Power Grid. Is there any chance or any talk with the Power Grid that is to buy out the balance equity?
Sorry, can you repeat balance? Okay, the Parbati Koldam Dam you mean? Okay.
Yes.
No, we haven't engaged on any such conversation yet, and it's anyways a very small amount, hardly about 75 crores or so. It's a smaller number, but yeah, we have not engaged in that.
I'm asking this because there are a large number of these kind of JV projects which are there with the Power Grid. I think there are huge numbers, maybe around 10 to 14 if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
So that's why it's a potential opportunity for us to go and source these deals.
Possibly, but I think this is too early. We just acquired the asset. It's the first quarter of operations. It's a joint venture. So maybe we'll explore, but it is too early for us to say anything on that.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, we take the last question from the line of Rushabh Sher Dalal from PR Share and Stock Brokers. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Harsh, and thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Just wanted to understand it on the return of capital, that is a component of our DPU. So you just said to one of the previous participants that, if the SPV generates more cash than what it requires to pay to IndiGrid, then they pay that particular portion of distribution as return on capital to the subsequently to the unit holders. Apart from this particular situation, is there any other situation in which IndiGrid pays any kind of distribution as return of capital? Because I remember that only in the second quarter of 2018 and once in 2019 we paid some 0.28 and 0.12 rupees as return on capital. And one more thing on this only, whether it has any impact on the net asset value of the trust. Thanks.
Okay. So answering second question first, there is no impact on net asset value and how it's paid. And to answer the first one, I think there are few other cases in that scenario also. One can see return of capital or other capital repayment. For example, we acquire a company along with cash, right? So let's say when on the date of the acquisition, company had 20 crores of cash, but that could not be upstreamed by the earlier seller or earlier owner because of whatever the capital structure or external lenders didn't allow or any other issues. So we acquired the company and then upstream this 20 crore of cash, right? So it's already factored in the valuation for the seller, but then we upstream this 20 crores of cash, which is the SPV pays to IndiGrid, the new owner. In such case also, there can be a capital repayment, but there will be a one-off, right? But there can be such one-offs, but in most cases, then interest.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah, I just lost you in between.
Yeah. So in most cases, it will be more cash than interest. That's when it comes to capital repayment. One-off could be when we acquire a company along with cash.
Okay. So what exactly is the rationale behind giving this return of capital and not giving it for so many quarters and, just giving it this time or, twice in once in 2018 and 19? Was that the same rationale in those quarters as well?
Correct. Pretty much same rationale. It is not in our hands, right? It's not a decision making that we do that this quarter we want to pay distribution in terms of capital repayment. If SPVs have received more cash, then interest that it can pay, it will come in form of capital repayment. Or if we have acquired an asset with an inbuilt cash, so I believe the last time in 2018 was the case when we acquired Patran asset from Techno Electric that already had 10 crores of cash, which we paid for. So that 10 crores of cash was upstreamed at that time. So upstream as in SPV paid to the IndiGrid as a principal repayment after acquisition. So these are the two cases, largely it will pan out, and none of them are BAU. Every quarter it will happen, right? It depends on the quarterly cash flow and any such events that can happen.
Okay. That's very useful. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Vipul Shah from Sumangal Investment. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Hearty congratulations for a very good set of numbers. My first question is there any precedent what will happen beyond this 30-year concession period globally? Means what will happen to the unit holders when the concession period ends? Is there any global precedent for this?
Okay. So just to correct Vipulji, I think you're mixing 30 years, 35 years with the unit itself. So I'll try to explain both. Okay. One, at an asset level, there are two possibilities that can take place. One is that the asset contracts will be extended further because we believe electricity will be needed beyond 35 years. And the owners of the assets are us. It's not a concession, so there is no transfer. and will continue to get paid, and this will be continuing as planned. Second, in case there is no extension of contract, as in the early part of the slide I explained, there is a significant chunk of metal, about 4 lakh tons of metal that is there in our portfolio today. While the word doesn't suit scrap, but even if you calculate a scrap value of that in today's term, in today's value term, it will be a significant chunk of today's price. Right? If we were to close the business today, there is a significant chunk of steel and aluminium in the company today. So whatever inflation numbers you can assume, that will be the value that will be scrapped in the business and paid to all the unit holders. Right? That is the second scenario. Third scenario.
Which is the, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Harsh, but which is the more likely scenario? Means globally, what has happened in other countries?
Okay. So globally, what happens is nobody scraps infrastructure that is built, right? And you have extension of contract. That's what happens reasonably. Okay?
So that is the most likely scenario.
That is the most likely scenario, right? That we believe that should happen. But again, at the end of the day, 30 years is a long time. We don't know, in what contractual framework it will take place, right? But what we know is that what assets we have, they have a significant value. Now, whether we'll realize it in form of operating those assets and earning income or scrapping that metal and pay it, in either case, there is a significant value. Now, we are not a decision maker at that policy level that which direction should it go to. If you ask my personal view or professional view, I believe infrastructure which is built with so much difficulty should be continued to operate because the incremental asset building is going to be far more expensive. For example, the assets that we have built right now, 5 years ago, if they were to be built again now, they will cost at least 50% higher, right? So imagine a scenario 30 years ahead. If government wants to build a new line, it's going to cost multiple times higher than operating the same line with a little bit of improvement and better tariff, right? So that's how we think that it should take place. The last question that you do, clarity on that is that this is why I described that as an asset level. Units are a going concern. There is no end of unit life. Right? Like an equity, it's an ownership right. It is no principal repayment and after that the unit cease to exist. So like in equity, if some InvIT's business ends, right, after 15 years, 5 years, 30 years, etc., and they are not growing, they are not buying more projects, etc., you can delist the InvITs also, just like delisting units, equity shares, right? It is a complicated process, but the SEBI regulations does provide for it.
Okay. Thank you very much for explaining it in detail. And lastly, again, I will return to the distribution of this quarter. As one previous I understood the rationale for returning the capital, but I didn't understand the rationale for reducing this interest payment component. Means what I want to convey is instead of this 3.2, it should have been 4.2 or something like that.
Correct. No. Right. I think if the IndiGrid board would decide to give 4.2, they could have given 4.2. But we believe it's not prudent. We believe predictability has more value than suddenly one quarter we increase by 4 rupees and next quarter it goes to 2 rupees, right? So there is a business, in this business there are seasonalities. In some quarter there is great collection, but maybe in the next quarter it will be lesser. Right? So it's not that 126% will remain always 126%. That is not possible. So if in one quarter it's 126, that means there is some quarter somewhere where it will be 64%, right? To average out to 100%. So as a business, we need to be able to act prudent. And in the quarter in which there is 126% collection, we should create a reserve out of 26% to ensure that the volatility can be met, right, in volatile months. That's the philosophy under which we are operating. And therefore, we keep this, 170 crore as a reserve. And maybe in next quarter, the collections are lesser, then we use out of this reserve. So this is to ensure that the predictability of DPU remains. That's why we are focused on maintaining that.
Okay, sir. And lastly, you say you made some payment to Sterlite Power to the tune of 68 crores and you received it 42 crores. That is what I think your CFO said. So, can you explain it in a layman's language what has happened?
Yeah, okay, sure. So what has happened is, what Jyoti explained is there's 43 crore income that has come in, which is on accrual. And there is a 63 crores of cash, 67 crores of cash that we have paid. The difference between the two is that amount that we paid to Sterlite Power is 70% of the NPV of incremental tariff that we had received. 43 crore of the amount that we have booked in the revenue is the cash we have collected already in arrears. In any of these regulatory settlement, when the regulator issues the order, you get paid arrears starting from COD. In this case, it was 5 years ago. So we received 43 crore in cash, against which we have paid the same amount, 70% of that cash, and the residual amount is a 70% of NPV of future tariff will receive on account of this tariff order.
Okay. Got it. Thank you, sir, and all the best for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Jiten Rushi from Axis Capital. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Thanks for taking my question and congratulations on good set of numbers. So just few questions from my side. So as you said, the project management will be done internally. So my understanding is correct, it will be done at the SPV level, sir?
Okay. So no, not SPV level. We have intermediate holding companies also. So we are going to make a entity called India Grid Limited 1 as a mother entity, which will do project manager for all SPVs.
Okay, so this will be with effect from FY22, right?
That's correct.
But there was a contract between us and the Sterlite which has got expired, and this has resulted in creation of this entity which will be doing the O&M work.
No, sure. The entity was already created. We were anyways doing project management work internally for all assets which we acquired other than Sterlite. So like, for example, PRKTCL, JKPTL, PTCL, all those assets we are doing project management on our own. Now, the contract has not expired. We have bilaterally decided that we want to do our O&M on our own, and therefore we are transitioning out. So it's not that it's not the contract that has expired. It is out of our choice that we have decided to do it on our own.
And what would be the payment structure here, like as a percentage of revenue? How it will work, sir?
No, it is intercompany in any case. So we'll continue to maintain a percentage of O&M cost to be paid to India Grid Limited 1, but it's a 100% subsidiary of India Grid Trust. So on a console basis, there is no external payment that is getting.
And sir, on the KTPL deal now, sir, when do you expect this to happen? Because of the COVID, we understand there could be some extension of time.
Correct.
So what is the deadline now where we can see it getting concluded?
So KTL is still an under construction asset. It has about 60% revenue generation that has started, but it's not completed yet. So tough to predict with the COVID uncertainties on when will it get completed. But we are watching it. As per our contract, it is valid up to December 22. So that's kind of an outer date for us to acquire.
December 22. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And sir, on the acquisition side, FRV, as I understand, is expected the SPA should get concluded next month, probably just June only. And now with the COVID situation, and there could be some asset which can get distressed because of the equity component. The original developer cannot invest equity into the system. However, the asset they have bid must have been of a good quality. So are we looking for any such kind of acquisition wherein we have the ability to acquire such under construction asset? Obviously, it can be a limited portion of your AUM. And are we looking out for some acquisition like this?
Oh, yes, certainly. We are looking for acquisitions like that, but in a limited way. I don't think there are many such projects, but we are looking for such acquisitions if it makes commercial sense.
Okay. So any new acquisitions expected this year, or just will stick around with KTL and FRV?
Sorry?
Any new acquisitions lined up, like probably?
Yeah, okay. No. So there may be new acquisitions, but that's not at a scale that we can certainly say it's happening this fiscal.
Okay. And so one last question, just wanted to understand. So this return of capital will also have an impact on the cost to the investor. Like, so if I've invested 100 rupees, if I'm getting 1 rupee back, so my cost would probably come down to 99, if I understand correctly.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's it from my side and all the best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We take the next question from the line of Kiran Naik from Modi FinCap. Please go ahead. Mr. Naik, your line is in talk mode. Kindly go ahead with your question, please. Mr. Kiran Naik, your line is in talk mode.
Let's go to the next one, please.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Manoj Shah from Laxco Investment. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to understand regarding this return of capital, as you were saying that if somebody has invested 100 rupees and you gave him a 1 rupee as return of capital, so how for that investor, if it is a retail investor, how it will get accounted for the tax purpose? Because dividend and interest are more or less taxable now in the marginal tax bracket. So how this will be treated?
So this will be slightly different, and I'm kind of, you should consult your tax advisor, but I'm just explaining at a conceptual level. Yeah. This would be removed as Jiten said on earlier question. If you have acquired a unit for 100 rupees, your cost of acquisition will become 99. Okay? So it will be a balance sheet adjustment. And as and when you decide to sell the unit, let's say you sell, at 140 rupees today, then the profit or the capital gains will be calculated based on selling price minus 99 versus selling price minus 100. So basically, this component will get impacted on the capital gains tax instead of a marginal tax. That's the way to look at it. But it will be taxed when you realize that gain as per the tax law. But that's the directional input. Just to clarify, the dividend is not on the marginal rate because this dividend is coming from the SPV which is paying in the old tax regime.
Okay. So because earlier, if I have understood, a dividend was tax-free in the hands of the investors in case of the equity shares. Okay. Now it has become taxable.
No. Only if the company that issued a dividend is following a new tax regime. If the company is continuing to follow old tax regime, you still have a tax-free dividend for that company, subject to your dividend not exceeding 10 lakhs and other provisions around that.
Yeah,
that's
a problem.
So it is to do with the choice of company in terms of old tax regime or new tax regime. The company that we have acquired is following the old tax regime, and therefore this dividend is given as a tax-free dividend from InvIT.
Okay, just coming back to that return of capital, as you said, when the investor sells, it will be calculated as a capital gain. So it will be more like a debt capital gain for like a 36-month period kind of it. That's how it has to be looked into it.
Correct. If you sell after 36 months, then it will be a long-term capital gains tax, the way whatever the rate is.
Like what we get in a debt, sale of a debt.
No. Your capital gains treatment will be like equity, just the holding period is like debt, 36 months.
Okay. Fine. Because a lot of this regulations have changed, so it was getting a little difficult.
Yeah, I agree. These are complex issues, and best to take an advisor for tax advisor on this.
Yeah, I can understand. Maybe for the layman understanding, if that can be put for a website, it can help a lot of retailers.
No, we have a website where on our website there is a tax query issued. You can probably refer to that also.
Fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We take the next question from the line of Kiran Naik from Modi FinCap. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity. Sir, I have only one question. Are the company planning any more entities in the coming years?
So as we have said that we want to refinance some of our existing debt, including the maturities that is coming in FY26. So we would certainly be doing a certain amount of capital raising for refinancing of debt. Size and tenor, etc., probably we can only talk about when we have done it.
Okay, it will be similar which had came in March, April for retail investors also?
Not sure. Tough to comment on that because see, there are a long process to issue anything to do a public debt. We have just done one, so we would probably do a private placement for some more debt for some time.
Okay, thank you, sir. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. As there are no further questions, I now hand the conference over to Mr. Swarnim Maheshwari for closing comments. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So thanks everyone for participating in the conference. Harsh, would you like to have any closing comments over here?
No, thanks a lot for everyone who has joined the call and continued. It's been a long call, but I think it deserves an annual call. Does deserve that much focus and Q&A. So we are very helpful. We are very thankful for all the investors to join the call and showcasing confidence, be it in rights issues or public debt issue that we have done, to wholeheartedly subscribe that. We are committed to a vision and strategy that we have put together for unit holders of IndiGrid, and we will continue to execute that with two things in mind, which is a predictable DPU and consistent growth. With that, I will just sign off and thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Edelweiss Securities, that concludes this conference. Thank you all for joining us, and you may now disconnect your lines.